morning. We have our afternoon session about to get started. We're going to start with Jenna, and then we've got Stephen and Ryan following Jenna. Three very strong papers presented today. Okay, very good. So last time I heard Jenna's, I think she did the whole 20 minutes in 5 minutes, right? It was really fast. So we'll see. I'll put the timer on in a second. But it's been great to work with both Jenna and her sister, who are so strong in organization and in writing. Very, very good. So need quiet in the audience. Jenna says, I would like to thank God for guiding me, Mr. Wade and Mr. Braun for helping me through my thesis, my parents for supporting me, and my friends for encouraging me. Jenna's title is To Kill a Miracle, While Euthanasia Should Not Be Legalized. Let me get the timer set, and I'll tell you when you can start. All right, you can start whenever you're ready.
It seemed like the right decision at the time. The doctors had explained everything, and the suffering was undeniable. Euthanasia. Everyone said that it was the best option to do, the most compassionate thing to do. But now, as you find yourself alone in a quiet house, the silence feels suffocating. You wondered what might have happened if you had just waited a little longer, if there had been another option. The what-ifs swirl in your mind. You were told it was the best choice, so why does it feel so wrong? If there was even the smallest chance that life could have continued, that hope was still there, shouldn't that have been reason enough to hold on just a little longer? And as you sit alone in the dark, you think to yourself, was it all worth it? Euthanasia has been a part of human history for long, with its beginnings tracing back to the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome, where it was generally accepted there. Doctors who come from the Hippocratic school opposed the acceptance of euthanasia, supported by the rise of Christianity in the 14th century. The 19th century then saw a revolutionary change in the use of anesthetics, and in 1870, a non-physician suggested the use of medications to intentionally end a patient's life, sparking extensive debate in the medical field. The topic of euthanasia never became a widespread discussion until around the 1970s and 80s, when it became an extensive academic research in many countries. Now, the topic of euthanasia has once again become a topic of interest in many more countries. Currently, euthanasia is legal in 10 countries. Studies show that pain is not the main motivation to request for euthanasia. Rather, the main motivating factors are loss of autonomy, diminished quality of life, and loss of dignity. Besides that, studies revealed that in countries where both euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide are legal, patients prefer to request for euthanasia. The word euthanasia derives from the Greek language, consisting of the word eu, meaning good, and thanatos, meaning death, making the word euthanasia literally translate to good death. However, its meaning has expanded and is now defined as the intentional practice of ending a patient's life through painless means, usually for those who are terminally ill and are suffering uncontrollably. Euthanasia presents an urgent global issue that needs immediate attention, as it impacts the quality of life of many vulnerable individuals. Besides that, euthanasia also impacts society as a whole, as it can slowly alter society's view on life and death, the role of doctors, and whether it is ever permissible to intentionally end a patient's life. Different countries and regions each have their own respective laws and legislations in order to be eligible for euthanasia. As the debate on the legalization of euthanasia gains more popularity and attention in each respective country, the number of countries that have legalized some form of euthanasia has also gradually increased with it. With the growing number of countries legalizing euthanasia, the ethical and societal impacts of euthanasia continue to spark debates, spreading like wildfire and fueling discussions among countries. With that, Euthanasia should not be legalized for three main reasons. Euthanasia raises profound ethical concerns and risks. Euthanasia raises the possibility of potential abuse and coercion. And there are viable alternatives to euthanasia that protects both patient and society. First, while euthanasia may seem like a compassionate end to suffering, this practice actually raises profound ethical concerns and risks. For one reasons, euthanasia devalues the lives of several vulnerable people, including the terminally ill, the disabled, the elderly, and many more. In countries where euthanasia is legal, this practice provides people with the option to end their lives. For some, life seems so unbearable that death seems like an act of mercy, which is why they wish to request for euthanasia. However, data shows that pain is not the main motivation to request for euthanasia. Rather, it is the fear of losing dignity. Patients feel afraid that as their health declines, so will their value and dignity as a human. And so, they wish to die at a time when they think that their dignity is still intact. However, it is important to understand that the appearance of a person or how productive he is does not matter. What matters is that everyone, healthy or sick, is always a somebody. Euthanasia is like a painter choosing to ruin his artwork just before the final strokes are finished. When a painter chooses to do this, it robs the artworks of its potential beauty and denies the painting's value that could have emerged throughout the creation process, including throughout its suffering. Thus, euthanasia does not preserve the dignity of a person, rather, it strips away the intrinsic dignity and value of the person. Aside from that, euthanasia can also significantly impact the participating doctors negatively. When a patient asks a doctor for help by euthanizing him, it undermines and disrespects the doctor's integrity and role as a doctor. Participating in euthanasia creates this contradiction between the act of euthanasia and the noble profession of a doctor. Other than that, the principles in the Hippocratic Oath, which has served as a foundation of medical ethics for many years, still remain relevant to this day, in which it states, "I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I'm asked, nor will I advise such a plan." To put it simply, the doctor's role is to simply help their patient in their illnesses and to avoid any actions that may cause them any harm. From this, it shows that the oath also rejects the idea of euthanasia, since in euthanasia, the doctor will inject a lethal drug to the patient to let them die. Hence, it is clear that euthanasia is not consistent with the role of the doctor and violates the traditional ethical codes of medicine. Another key concern that could result from the legalization of euthanasia is its impact on the doctor-patient relationship. The relationship between patient and doctor relies on trust, as the doctor must trust that the patient will be honest about their symptoms, and at the same time, the patient must trust that the doctors will act in their best interest. Participating in euthanasia undermines the patient's trust placed in physicians to heal and not to harm. This lack of trust can already be seen in countries that have legalized euthanasia. For instance, in the Netherlands, where over half of euthanasia cases were no longer voluntary, elderly patients were so afraid that they were going to be euthanized against their will that they started to carry on cards stating their refusal. As a wise man once said, "Trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair." Once patients lose their trust in doctors, restoring trust will become extremely difficult. Thus, this shows how euthanasia will distort how society views the role of doctors, eroding the trust between doctor and patient. Second, the legalization of euthanasia raises the possibility of potential abuse and exploitation done by external influences. For one reason, vulnerable individuals may be coerced into choosing euthanasia even if they do not truly want to die. For example, consider the case of a 65-year-old woman who has been suffering from metastatic breast cancer for several years now while receiving ineffective treatment. She decided to request for euthanasia because she was afraid of becoming a burden on her daughter, who had to both work and take care of her. In this case, while the patient was not coerced by anyone around her into choosing euthanasia, it highlights the possibility of abuse and coercion done by external influences that may lead to a life-ending decision. Thus, if euthanasia is legalized, it will be extremely difficult to ensure that the patient's decision to be euthanized is an autonomous and independent decision free from external influences. Aside from that, in the ongoing euthanasia debate, one of the most famous arguments against the legalization of euthanasia is a slippery slope, which states that once society embraces any type of euthanasia, it will inevitably lead to the acceptance of other practices which are currently deemed unacceptable. This can already be seen in several countries. For instance, in Canada, euthanasia was first legalized in September of 2016, with one of the requirements being that the patient must have an incurable illness with a foreseeable death. This requirement was then eliminated in 2021, and subsequently in 2023, the eligibility of euthanasia was expanded to include patients with only a mental health illness or psychiatric conditions. Thus, this shows that even if euthanasia was initially exclusive for the terminally ill, the permissibility of euthanasia will eventually expand and lead to the legalization of euthanasia for anyone with any or even no reason at all. Another significant concern in the legalization of euthanasia is that it is extremely difficult to regulate, if not impossible. In all countries that legalize euthanasia, there are laws stating that the request for euthanasia must be voluntary, well thought, and persistent over time. There should be an explicit written request by the patient when the patient is still competent enough to make this decision. However, even with the existence of these safeguards, there are more than 500 people in the Netherlands who undergo involuntary euthanasia every year. There's been attempts to take these cases into court, but failed, which serves as evidence that the judicial system is growing to become more tolerant of such cases. Essentially, this example shows that even with the existing legal framework against the abuse of euthanasia, it is difficult to enforce them altogether. Third, there are viable alternatives to euthanasia that protects both the well-being of the patient and the ethical integrity of society. One alternative is palliative care, which provides comfort and alleviates suffering without ending life. In this era driven by cost containment, the legalization of euthanasia will undermine society's commitment to care for the dying and stifle innovation in palliative care. A case involving a cancer patient shows this. This patient refused both treatment and his doctor's proposal for euthanasia. Unsure of what to do, his general practitioner decided to ask a palliative doctor for advice, stating that when presented with this case, he would usually solve it with euthanasia. Under the palliative doctor's advice, this doctor was able to provide his patient with some relief. The doctor's remark that he usually solves such cases with euthanasia shows how dangerous the acceptance of euthanasia is, as it blocks doctors from doing what is considered a basic part of palliative care. Thus, instead of legalizing euthanasia, society should prioritize its efforts into improving the access and quality of palliative care. Aside from that, proper mental health care can address the psychological sufferings that is experienced by patients that can often contribute to euthanasia requests. Every patient facing near death must have at least once wondered whether life is still worth living or not. As a consequence, many patients who request for euthanasia may have done so not because of their diagnosis, but rather due to untreated mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, as well as simply from loneliness. An interview done in the Netherlands shows this, in which patients admitted that they did not truly want to die. Rather, their request for PAS was a cry for help. They wanted to be seen and heard, as many also indicated that they did not feel heard by the mental health care system. Thus, mental health considerations are important to achieving better care for patients. Both patient and doctors need to be aware of any mental health issues and their influence on the patient's desire to die. Another alternative to euthanasia is an enhanced social support, which can mitigate feelings of isolation and hopelessness that often lead to euthanasia requests. Researchers conducted a meta-analysis on the relationship between social support and suicidal behaviors. The results showed that there was an inverse relationship between the two, which underscores the importance of saving lives through social support. While this study does not directly talk about euthanasia, its findings are still relevant given the factors that may lead an individual to contemplate both suicide and euthanasia, such as the feelings of loneliness, hopelessness, despair, the fear of burdening others, and the idea that there is nothing for them in the future. While there are differences between the two, the emotions that may lead an individual to contemplate either of them is similar. Thus, if an enhanced social support is able to help an individual overcome his emotions, often leading to suicide, it will also be able to do the same with euthanasia. While the arguments above are convincing on their own, some might propose other solutions or pose disagreements. First, some might argue that every person has the right to personal autonomy, which others should respect, allowing them to decide for themselves what to do with their own body, including choosing to end their lives through euthanasia. While it is true that personal autonomy is important, this right should still be balanced with other factors, as this decision does not only impact themselves, but will also have serious ethical and societal implications. With the legalization of euthanasia, while it does provide patients with the freedom to choose whether to live or die, however, euthanasia will then merely become another legal treatment option. And it will not only become just an option for those who request for euthanasia, but slowly become a duty for doctors. This duty can then extend to anyone who is suffering unbearably, regardless of whether they have consented to euthanasia or not, which may in turn violate an individual's right to not be euthanized. Thus, if euthanasia is legalized, while it does provide the requesting patient with autonomy, this is done at the expense of other individuals' autonomy. Aside from that, some might argue that in the long run, euthanasia, with its relatively cheaper cost compared to long-term healthcare, can help families struggling financially. The financial burden of healthcare can indeed overwhelm both the patient and their families. However, legalizing euthanasia actually slams the door on advancements in more affordable palliative care. A study done in Canada shows this, in which a palliative doctor described how he felt that they were allocating more resources towards assisted death when they should have used it for palliative care. By diverting more resource funds towards euthanasia, it will be impossible to improve the quality and access of palliative care, creating an even greater financial burden on families in need of this type of healthcare. Thus, instead of legalizing euthanasia, it is more beneficial to solve the broader issues behind euthanasia, such as the high cost of palliative care and the need to improve end-of-life options. Throughout this thesis, we have discussed the reasons why euthanasia should not be legalized, starting from the various risks that could arise that not only harms the patient, but also their doctors, families, and society, to the high risk of potential abuse and exploitation done by external influences. We saw the potential of possible alternatives to euthanasia that addresses the same problem through palliative care, mental health care, and social support. For these reasons, euthanasia remains as a dangerous and inappropriate policy that should not be legalized. Human existence is not defined purely by the joy that we experience, but also by the suffering that we face each day. Human life should not be valued for its absence of suffering, as it is mostly through our suffering that we are able to build meaningful connections with other people and act with compassion towards others. To legalize euthanasia is to turn our backs on humanity and what it means to be human. We must never lose sight of this truth and become a society that values the true meaning of compassion. Hence, what does this mean for us, the average citizens? While the government must be the first to make a change in the legislation, we citizens can also support them to achieve this goal. One way we can do this is through speaking out against euthanasia and supporting the implementation of laws that criminalizes euthanasia. In addition, we could bring the issue of euthanasia and its dangers into light towards the public. Lastly, we can advocate for better alternative systems, prioritizing the quality and access of such systems. By playing our role in society, we can ensure that the vulnerable are offered a pathway through their suffering that will not harm them. Our time to act is now. Our actions today will shape the future, so let's be a voice for the voiceless, ensuring that no one ends their lives prematurely. Thank you.
Great job, Jenna, and great job keeping the pace down. It was very good. Our panelists today are Miss Abigail and Miss Prue. I will let Miss Prue go first.
I was given the first round about maybe because it's your first time. So, hi, Jenna. Good job. There are a few things that I want to point out that I genuinely enjoy of your writing. I am very moved by the particular part of the writing about mentioning the painter, of like it ruins the painting before it's actually finished, which is, I think that was very beautiful.
Thank you, Miss.
And I also really want to appreciate the emphasis on the matter of how euthanasia can turn into the duty of the doctors. As a clinical psychologist myself, being part of the medical field-ish kind of, it's eye-opening on the things that doctors have to face with. So putting emphasis on that, how that would actually become a burden for the doctors, it's actually really good. Fortunately for you, I am not 100% against your idea, but unfortunately for you, my job is to be against your idea. So again, disclaimer, I'm not against you, it's just your ideas, okay?
Yeah.
Right. So one thing that you did write in your writing is that there is the mentioning of like euthanasia can also be part of the exploitation where the family is greedy, then they can get insurance and blah, 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 come to the money. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. So why bother with the euthanasia and, just work on the insurance policy? I mean, like, if I understand properly, insurance policies are not easy to claim. The insurance in general is not easy to claim. All they need to do is just change the insurance policy. Why bother with the euthanasia part?
Thank you for your question. Although I do agree that the insurance policy may be like strengthened so that families may not be able to get their relatives' insurance easily. However, I believe that aside from that, we also have this duty to also stop euthanasia, not only because of the greedy family, but there's also some families who genuinely think that euthanasia is the best option for their relatives. So for these people, they don't actually want to claim the insurance, but they think that like they feel like as their euthanasia is the most compassionate care that they can give. And I think to stop this, it's not enough to just change the insurance policy, but it has to start from the root cause, which is euthanasia itself.
Okay, so building upon that answer, and it's actually related to my next question because personally, I am lucky to have like family members those who have passed away are not, they didn't suffer too long from their terminal illnesses, not just one but multiple. But in the concept of families thinking that euthanasia is the best route, yes, I do have family members who thinks that way. And so it comes to a question, what if it's the matter of the loss of dignity that you mentioned? So everyone knows they're going to die. So how should we argue against family members who actually agrees that they're losing dignity, so let's just let them be and just help them along the way?
Yes, thank you for this question. And it's a very important question because many people think that their dignity is based on something external, such as, for example, the appearance of the person or how sick they are or like how productive they are in society, if they have any use in society. However, I believe that it's important to understand that the dignity of a person doesn't matter on these external factors. Dignity comes from internal. There's nothing that can change that. We have dignity and value just because we are a human.
So in touching of like dignity, you are arguing that say they are very ill and they are on their way, how do you preserve such dignity in a terminal illness?
So if they're already like really ill and they don't have any much hope to live at all, however, their dignity can still be preserved because, first of all, like I said, it's not based on external factors that contribute to dignity. It's just because internally. However, there's also many in this day and age because of the technology that has advanced. So there's actually most pain and suffering can actually be alleviated in a way for these patients, so that even if they don't have any more cure, they don't have any more hope of curing from their terminal illness, they can still be given compassionate care where they don't feel much suffering at the end of their life until they die.
So it comes to the question of how. Okay, give you an example so that it will kind of give you an idea. So the idea of euthanasia, you give them a drug and then they like die, right? So what is the basic care of this palliative part? Is it we're just going to give them food until they can't eat at all? Or are we continuously going to give them painkillers? Or are we just going to, or in the case that I am very intimately involved is, there is no help by oxygen tanks, no liquids coming in, no food coming in, but like we don't help the person to pass along, just like we don't give the person anything, even though like the person is like struggling. So what is preserving dignity in such situation? How do we preserve dignity?
Well, since I'm not a doctor myself, so I don't really know the ways how they like treat a patient to like alleviate their suffering. However, I believe that the how is through alleviating their suffering. I don't really know the how.
Fair. That is fair. That is fair. All right. Probably one touch of a heavy question, then I'll throw it to Miss Abby. Okay, one heavy question. I mean, in a way, it is quite like suicide, right? So like you're helping person to commit suicide. Isn't that a better idea instead of them coming quietly to suddenly disappearing and then we find the body decaying 5 days later? Imagine the cleanup. And then imagine the trauma. Okay? Now, if we help them along to, in a way, commit suicide, it's cleaner, it's easier, and the family can actually, prepare. There's a higher amount of trauma dealt with sudden extremities of a death instead of when you prepare for it. You can check out the psychology papers. What do you say about that?
Oh, well, obviously, suicide is a big problem in today's society. However, I still believe that euthanasia should not be the solution to solve these suicide problems. Because, first of all, every country has done some type of things to prevent suicide. And by legalizing euthanasia, it's as if like the nation is saying that instead of preventing suicide, we're allowing them to suicide, just in a way that's more like people think it's more dignified. However, in the basis of it, it's technically the same. So instead of legalizing euthanasia to solve these suicide problems, it's more important to solve the issues why suicide are happening, such as the mental health problems, the increase of mental health, and giving them counseling and therapy instead of legalizing euthanasia for them to be able to commit suicide just legally.
All right, cool, thanks. I'm going to throw it to Miss Abby now.
Okay, so hi, Jenna.
Hi, Miss.
Thank you for the very informative speech. Yeah, your topic is very interesting. Yeah, so Jenna, may I ask you why did you choose this topic?
Well, first of all, it's also because I want to become a doctor. And with this issue, I feel that like there, in many nations, many doctors have like fosters this belief that killing people as a way of compassionate care is also a part of their duty as doctors. And I really strongly am against that. And besides that, also in many countries, such as the Netherlands, they have also like expanded their eligibility of euthanasia. They're thinking of expanding it to people who are tired of living or think that their life is fulfilled. And I think that's very dangerous because then it could lead to this slippery slope where anybody can request it, even with no reason at all.
Okay, thank you for that very good answer. So yeah, we have another doctor, Mr. Future Doctor. So actually, your title caught my attention, To Kill a Miracle. So Do you know how many miracles has happened in every patient's lives who are terminally ill? Do you have any data?
Thank you for the question, but I don't actually have any data on like how many miracles or like how they like live again even if they have terminally ill patients. I don't think there's much data on it either because it's hard to like find every cases where like a patient suddenly lives again after a serious terminal illness, and it's very hard to find such data, I think.
Okay, so I will give you a context, okay? So Jenna, let me give you a scenario. A family of 3 with a young child, the father who is a custodian at the mall got into an accident. So he fell into a coma. The wife doesn't work, she's a housewife. They don't have any insurance. The doctor said the husband is brain dead. So he was so straightforward. So, Jenna, family can pay the hospital expenses. So what do you think the mother should do?
Thank you for the question. Can I clarify? So like the family cannot pay for the
The expenses, the hospital
hospital
bills.
expenses.
Yes.
Yes, so obviously there are cases where a family cannot afford the healthcare, the finance of the healthcare. However, I don't believe that that this justifies the legalization of euthanasia, because there are other options so that they can access these types of healthcare. For example, they can set up charities or GoFundMe's, especially in this day and age where like technology is everywhere. Everyone can contribute a little bit of their money so that they can still access these types of healthcare. Yeah.
Okay, so good answer. So what about in Indonesia? Do you have any institution or maybe a what do you call it, charity? Like for example, in the Philippines, we have this PCSO. Yeah, they provide assistance for those poor people who cannot pay the hospital bills. Do you have anything here in Indonesia that support or help?
I didn't actually search in Indonesia because I was focusing mostly on countries that have legalized euthanasia, and Indonesia is not one of them. However, in countries that have legalized euthanasia, for example, in America legalized assisted suicide, and in there are some organizations such as Care Not Killing, Our Duty of Care, Americans United for Life, that can help these types of people who are struggling financially.
Okay. So thank you for that answer. So yeah, I like real life situation, Jenna. So give me. I want to give you another example, a real story in our church. So an old lady, she has a heart problem, and then she fell into a comatose. She was actually hospitalized and stayed in the ICU for a month. And because of piling up of hospital bills, the family decided to bring her home and, to have palliative care. But then they have to hire a full-time caregiver. It's not cheap, yeah? And also, the adult children should take turn, right, to take care of their mom. Yeah, not only depending on the full-time caregiver. So we pray, we wish for the best for that old lady. And guess what? She was in a vegetative state for at least 2 years. And then she passed on. So what do you think about this? Give a comment.
Thank you for the question. I believe there will be cases where, like, even if you have prayed so hard, and like their families are like supporting them, even like giving them palliative care, caretakers, which is very expensive. But at the end, they still passed on without even opening their eyes or in a vegetative state. However, this also does not justify the legalization of euthanasia, because this patient. This patient, the best that we can do is hope for the best, and the rest is up to God. It's not our right to to decide for this patient whether that it's time for her to go, because that's only God's right.
So actually, the children, they were deprived or they were robbed from quality of life, right? Because they were drowning in debts, right? So yeah, you were actually in your paper, you're saying that, yeah, a quality of life, a good death, and everything. But then we can see that the reality, Jenna, is there, right? So, yeah. So, one more question, Mr. Wade. The word euthanasia is actually not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, Jenna. So, where can we find wisdom in this issue?
Word.
Where can we find wisdom? Because this is not actually directly mentioned in the Bible, euthanasia.
So, first of all, the Bible teaches us that we are made in the image of God, and therefore every human life is sacred. This is said in Genesis verse 26, and in when He created humans. And this shows that every human life is sacred, and so that we don't have the right to take away somebody's life. And besides that, God, in Deuteronomy 32, verse 39, God says, the Lord says, see now that I myself am He, there is no God besides me. I put to death and I bring to life. I've wounded and I will heal, and no one can deliver out of my hand. This shows that only God can bring somebody out of, to die. We don't have the right to decide whether somebody lives or die. And besides that, also in Romans 5, verse 3 to 5, God says that Christians rejoice in suffering because suffering brings perseverance, character, and character, hope. This shows that there is a value in persevering through suffering, where it actually brings us closer to God.
Thank you, Jenna. I don't have any more questions.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Really good job, Jenna. I want to ask a couple of questions. First of all, you just mentioned about suffering, right?
Yes.
And to me, there's a lot here to talk about just the philosophy of suffering at the end of your life. I mean, a lot of times doctors these days, even though they've taken the Hippocratic Oath, they think ending suffering is their job. But how would you view suffering? Is suffering something that we should see almost as beautiful at the end of someone's life, or how do we view suffering philosophically? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yes, thank you for the question. I believe that even though most people think that like suffering is something to be avoided, which is why they go as far as killing themselves to end their sufferings, however, we can actually learn something from suffering, because it is mostly through our suffering that we are able to understand one another and act with compassion towards one another. We understand like the true meaning of compassion is not through killing one another, but through compassionate care.
Yeah, good. And I would say that suffering, watching my father suffer before he died, it's a difficult thing, and yet knowing that he's suffering as he's birthed into heaven is such it's actually a beautiful thing, as opposed to an atheist who thinks there's nothing but terror before they go, right? And so that's sort of a cool thing. But what about, a lot of your peers are asking about DNR. So do not resuscitate. So assume you've got an elderly person, and this is the truth. Here's the true case, is that when somebody's very old and they're terminal and they're dying, exactly how they die, there's many different ways. Their heart could give out, right? And if their heart gives out, is one of the last things to happen, and they don't have a DNR, then the doctor might start doing CPR and try to bring them back to life for just a little bit longer before their kidneys go out or something like that. But the death process is itself an interesting thing. But what about DNR? Is that okay if a patient has a do not resuscitate order? Should the doctor obey that, or should they do everything they can to bring them back to life?
Thank you for the question. I think in this case, there's like a dilemma for the doctors, because on one hand, the patient has this order so that they don't resuscitate them when they have passed. But then at the same time, there's this duty for doctors to help patients no matter what they say. And I think in this case, it might be a difficult choice. However, I think that since DNR is also a part of passive euthanasia, where you just let them die, I think that it should not be legalized actually, because for these patients, even though they have passed away, however, God has given you like this medical equipments, these doctors, so that they can so that you can, maybe like God will give you a second chance to life. So instead of denying this, I think you should accept it rather than just dying.
Okay, good. And I have one last question, quick question. If a doctor performs euthanasia on a patient because the patient asks, should that doctor be charged with murder?
If I believe yes, because especially in this, if euthanasia is already not legalized, it's criminalized in a country, and so there will be times when some doctors like go against the law and do it despite the law. So to really force this law so that everybody obeys, I believe that it is crucial to implement harsh punishments on doctors who does euthanasia.
Good job, Jenna. Your time is over. You've done a great job. We'll meet friends, family, panelists, advisors over here for photos, and then Stephen will be up at about 1:05.